You have me, Richard Hunter. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history end of things. Jim here, Jim Lee. He's going to talk about the digging piece of the archaeology. And the third of the three of us is Rich Veit. Thank you, Rich, for coming into Trenton on this revolting day. Rich is actually, he's going to deal with the sort of material culture piece of this, which is tremendous, really interesting, and delighted to have you here. We've had Europeans and Africans and other peoples here at this location for close to 350 years. We've had Native Americans here for maybe 4,000 to 5,000 years before that. So first point I wanted to make is that the European African piece of it is 5% perhaps of the site's total period of occupation, not very much that we're talking about from the standpoint of historical archaeology. Native American is a much, much longer time span. Second thing, the Trent family is at this location for a total of 15 years. I think most people tend to, since it's called the Trent House, they kind of assume there's a much longer association here. So that's less than 5% of the historical period that we're dealing with the Trents. And archaeology is, you will see here, deals with this entire time span and the entire site. So it's not just the storied house that you see here in this first picture, and nor just the building here that we're standing in, which dates from the late 19th century and has nothing to do with the Trents at all. It's the entire property that we're dealing with here, the grounds and what's in the ground, everything within the brick walls that surrounds the property, and also beyond that, as we'll see in a moment. We are interested in the Trents, of course, but no more so than we're interested in other property owners and the incredibly wide diversity of people who've lived here. So this is a long and complicated history, and I can't possibly, in 15 minutes, which is how long I'm supposed to be up here for, I can't deal with all of that. So prompted by 15 images, I'm going to skim through the history and hit on a few of the high spots that are most archaeologically relevant, and from which Jim and Rich here will take you in a little deeper. So think of this as, it's kind of like leapfrogging over time across the timeline of Trent House history. So one image here for 5,000 years of prehistory for the Native American piece of the story here. So just to talk quickly to this image, you're looking on the left at an aerial photograph of Trenton from today. Superimposed on top of that, you've got some circles with numbers in, which represent documented locations where Native American archaeological materials have come up within the downtown here. And number one is the Trent House. And we've related that to geological landforms, two terraces that run along the east side of the Delaware, the Valley Heads Terrace and the Binghamton Terrace. And most of these sites are related to the Valley Heads Terrace. On the bottom right, by the time you get to the end of this 5,000 years and you're in the 17th century, we have a map here from 1616. Somebody who sailed up the Delaware River and roughly plotted what they thought they were looking at the time. And you have a dashed rectangle there. There's a blow up of that in the very bottom right, where you are looking at the falls of the Delaware. And these black splodges that are on either side of the river there, those represent locations of Native American settlements. So this is right before the first Europeans show up, early mid 17th century. And the group, the name of the particular band of Native Americans who are like a subgroup of the Lenape and the Unami, known as the Sanhecans or Stanhecans. And so Sanhecan Way, you probably know, that's where that name comes from. All right, so we go on a little deeper into the late 17th century. Now I'm trying. All right, so 1679, a shipload of English Quakers comes up to Burlington, and some of those people come on up further to the falls. One of these people is Marlon Stacy, and he is the Trenton area's first European settler. He comes up and settles right at the falls. One of the main reasons he comes here is that where the Assunpink comes into the falls is a really good location to build a mill. And he builds a mill there in 1679. And that is really the beginning of Trenton, is that mill site. And he builds a house. I think the first one is probably a pretty ramshackle little thing. Don't really know where that was. It may have been right around here. Replaces that pretty soon after that with a much bigger home, which was named Ballyfield, which is named after the place that he came from in England, in Nottinghamshire. So he had this estate that he set up called Ballyfield. And you're looking here at a map of the estate at the time it passed out of the Stacy family's hands and was acquired by the Trents. So just on the Stacy family, when he arrived, he came with his wife. He had, I think, 4 kids at the time he arrived. He had another 4 kids while he was here. This is Marlon Stacy Sr. He had indentured servants with him, at least 2 of them, 2 names we know of, Hugh Staniland and Sarah Ely. And he had, at least at some point during his time here, he takes on enslaved people also. And we know at least 4 individuals from the documentary record, 3 of whose names we know, Jane, Will, and Dick, were some of the enslaved people who worked here for Marlon Stacy. The elder Marlon Stacy died in 1704. The property passed to his son, also called Marlon, and his widow received dower rights. And you'll see in a moment that there's this term door house, which we think means dower house, and that's part of the dower estate that the elder Marlon Stacy's widow received after he died. So the map that we're looking at here, this shows the 800 acres on the right here that was surveyed at the time that William Trent bought the property from Marlon Stacy. And this is a manuscript map in the state archives. It's really hard to read, obviously, at that scale. So blown up at the left there is a portion of that map, the top left corner. And you can see there's a little clump of 3 buildings there, 1 larger and 2 smaller ones behind it. That is Ballyfield. That's the estate known as Ballyfield. And if to orient yourself, Delaware River's on the right, and the Assunpink is coming in on the top of that little detailed map there. So one thing we tried to do was plot that 800-acre property onto the present day city aerial photo of Trenton. And that's what you're looking at in this map. And so the red line, which goes on the north side of the Assunpink, you can see the Assunpink going from right to left, the squiggly blue line. And the Trent House is down at towards the bottom left there, those 3 buildings, the 3 yellow buildings we have labeled there as Ballyfield. So that's close to right where we are right here. We don't know exactly where that is, but our assumption from later clues is that it's really close to the Trent House, the site of Ballyfield. All right, so Trent built the house across behind us here between 1719 and 1721. He laid out streets for the town of Trenton across the Assunpink. So Warren, today, Warren and Broad, State in front, that sort of triangle, that awful, impossible downtown, try and find your way around. That's laid out for the large part by the Trent family. Trent only lived in the house for just a few years. He died on Christmas Day, 1724. So it's like 3 or 4 years after he moved in. He died on Christmas Day under somewhat suspect circumstances. We don't really know the full story there. And after he died, there was a dispute over the ownership between his second wife and his eldest son, James, which took a year or 2 to settle the estate. And in that period, we think probably a lot of his belongings and properties were dispersed, so that by the time the inventory of his estate is done, a couple of years after he dies, it's valued at a fairly low value of £1,100 at the time. And 1/3 of that value is accounted for by 11 enslaved individuals, which is a pretty shocking fact. That the property eventually was sold out of the Trent family in 1729. So there's that 15 years of Trent family connection with the property. All right, it goes to a fellow named, oh, it worked, fantastic. Thank you. It went first to actually a relative of the family, William Morris, and William Morris then passed the property on to somebody called George Thomas. He's who you see in the top left here. And so we've got two portraits, and we're going to talk now about these two individuals and about the kitchen wing a little bit. So the young boy to the right of George Thomas on the left there, the painting is titled George Thomas and Servant Boy, I think it is. He's probably enslaved. I think that's the painting was done in England, which may account for that. I don't know, but it's certainly Thomas, like the Trents, like the Stacys, were slaveholders. So Thomas, he was the governor of Pennsylvania from the 1730s until the late 1740s. And Lewis Morris, he is the first governor of New Jersey on its own, whereas prior to him becoming governor, New Jersey was always governed by the governor of New York and New Jersey together. So he's the first sort of true sole governor of New Jersey. Thomas, we don't think ever actually lived on the property. He lived in Pennsylvania for the most part, and so he would have been renting the property out. One of the people he rented out to before Lewis Morris appears on the scene was the state attorney general, sorry, the colonial attorney general, name I can't remember. And then in the 1740s, this is when Lewis Morris, he's just become governor. He's in his, I think, late 60s, so he's quite elderly. And he had been prior to this time, there were these dual capitals of Perth Amboy for East Jersey and Burlington for West Jersey. He wanted to be located more centrally between those two places. And so he chose to make his home, governor's home, right here in Trenton, and decided that he wanted to rent the Trent House from George Thomas. So there's a fair bit of correspondence about the renting of the property in 1742. And one of the things that Lewis Morris is particularly concerned about is the kitchen. And this is primarily because the original kitchen in the main house, which the lady who we had chatting with us at the beginning here, that kitchen was in the basement of the house, and it was prone to flooding, and obviously didn't work too well as a functional kitchen. So Morris, when he rented the property, he wanted the new kitchen to get built. And so there's this little quote here, which you should read while I'm talking here. And so we have certain bits of information about this kitchen wing that was built in 1742 and survives for quite some time. And again, particularly with reference to the archaeology, the quote in the bottom here, which is from a sale ad several years later, it actually gives you the dimensions of the kitchen, 30 by 20, and it was connected to the house by what they're calling a gangway, which is an interesting word in itself to be used here, 14 by 20, and that the kitchen was 2 stories high, had a well inside it, and that you will note there is a well out there, and 4 handsome apartments above for servants with a fireplace in one room if one of those servants should get sick. So we've got a nice bit of detail there. So after Lewis Morris actually dies in the Trent House in 1746, Thomas eventually sells it to another notable Philadelphia merchant called Robert Lettuce Hooper, and then it passes on to a Dr. Bryant in the late 1760s, who was a New York City doctor. Here's a nice map that shows you that, yes, they built the kitchen wing. So you can see the Trent House there in the middle, the gangway, and then the little smaller building attached, that would be the kitchen wing. and it's Delaware River at the bottom, this sort of avenue of trees leading down to where the ferry was at the wharf, at the bottom right. And that was the sort of principal axis for the building. So now we're with Dr. Bryant, and in the Revolutionary War. And the key figure, Bryant himself he was a doctor. He was quite a prominent figure in the town. He was supposedly a loyalist sympathizer, but he seems to have probably been pretty much accepted by both sides of the conflict during the war. He eventually sells to this fellow John Cox in 1778, and so Dr. Bryant was here at the time of the battles of Trenton. He continued living here for a little while, and then he sells up to John Cox. And the little bullet points here will tell you a lot about John Cox. He's a very important figure on the Patriot side during the Revolution. He's a sort of industrialist, becomes a key military figure, and he becomes one of the assistant quartermaster generals for 2 years while he is living here at the Trent House. So this becomes a kind of sort of glorified office for the Continental Army supply system while he's actually living in the house, and goods are coming in and out of the port down the river here at Lamberton. He's a really key figure. So Cox also, he lived here until around 1790. And throughout the 1780s, Trenton was a really hopping place. You know, they were considering it for the national capital at that time. And there was certainly quite a social scene going on. And John Cox, he was a sort of key figure in the Trenton, Philadelphia social elite, and receiving all kinds of grand people in the house here, some of whom we will be talking about a little bit. While Cox is here, the French army, as I think most of you probably know, passed through Trenton, both on its way down to Yorktown from Rhode Island, and then on the way back the following year, so 1781 and 1782. This map shows you the Trent House is, there's a blow up of where the Trent House is in the bottom left, but you can see the artillery encamped down by the river at the bottom of Ferry Street, and the troops actually lining along what would be South Broad Street. And so the Trent House itself doesn't seem to have much going on the immediate surroundings of the house. That was probably deliberate. I think maybe Cox didn't want them camping in his front lawn, that kind of thing. But you know, certainly the army is close by to the Trent House at this time. Cox then in the late 1780s, and he's pretty elderly at this point, is looking to sell off the property, and he eventually goes back to Philadelphia and dies in 1793, I think it is. But he has the property surveyed in around about 1790. This particular map that we're looking at here, the Trent House is it's very hard to see. So we have a nice blow up of the central part of the map here, where the Trent House is. In the left at the top, you can see where it says garden. The house is the rectangle immediately below that to the right. And then there's a much smaller rectangle just to the northeast of that, to the upper right of the house. That would be the kitchen wing. And then you can see there's a whole slew of outbuildings further east and north, which would be kind of under where the Justice Complex is today. So who knows what they removed when they built that wonderful creature out there. The other thing on this map is the picture on the bottom, which is a sort of medallion above the title of the map, which shows the house and the kitchen wing looking at it from the south. So that's from down there looking that way. And you can, again, we've got clues as to what that building was, what it looked like. So it's a 2-bay, 2-story, has a chimney at the back, it looks like, and then you've got this gangway connecting it. Just put this one in to emphasize how the Trent House was one of many large fancy estates by 1800 along the Delaware. And this, so the Trent House is the building in the immediate right there. This is a well-known image of the riverfront. And the State House, which you can see immediately to the left of it. So half of that building still survives within the present day State House. And down below the State House, there is a mill at the mouth of the Assenpink. That was a paper mill. After Cox moves away and back down to Philadelphia, there's a very interesting period in the 1790s, which I won't go into in detail, but there are a few years where one of the French planters gets caught up in the Haitian revolt in Haiti and moves to Philadelphia and then to the Trent House. And he actually buys the Trent House from Cox. And then he decides to go back to Haiti with his son, gets killed. And then the property then reverts back to the Cox family. And after that, that's a particularly interesting story that is just worth all kinds of further research and other talks and things. The property then goes into a different Cox family. So this is Cox with an E, C-O-X-E, and you can see his name in the bottom left here, Daniel W. Cox. And he owns the Trent House property for several decades up into the 1830s. And he is a Philadelphia merchant. He again doesn't live on the property. He lives in Philly, rents it out to various people. Again, this is something that needs more research done on it. But he is looking to sell off and subdivide a lot of the surrounding land and the house as well. And again, this particular map, which is around about 1804, has an image of the house at the bottom right, and you're looking at it from the north side here, and it looks a little bit different. It's not, it doesn't match the view from the 1780s on the other medallion that we were looking at a moment ago. So the other thing that's going on is he develops a mill site right on the riverbank, just sort of over there, between here and the Delaware. And you're looking at that mill, which is a very large structure in the middle at the bottom here. That's a painting from the 1820s. As part of, this is one of the subdivisions sketches that was done during the Cox with an E ownership. And we're looking at a plan there of the house again. And you can see how the kitchen wing is still standing. And we've still got that connecting hyphen, that gangway. And see how that is in relation to the corner of the house. This is one of several maps and sketches that we have to try and work with to understand what the archaeology is telling us. Now moving up to 1850, 1849, 1850, we're looking at a map on the upper left. That's the first, one of the first really detailed maps of Trenton, which does show the Trent House, and that's in the upper right, enlarged there. You can see the main block of the house with a sort of L-shaped, and the piece sticking out to the right is where the kitchen wing would be also. So we think that is showing the original 1742 kitchen wing still in place in 1849. And on surrounding that particular map, there are various engravings, and one of the ones is at the bottom left there, which is showing the south face of the Trent House again. And you can just make out behind the two trees on the right, there's that two-bay, two-story kitchen wing still standing in 1849. The image on to the right at the bottom is 1 year later, looking at the house from the other side, and behind the trees to the left of the house is where that kitchen wing, we believe, still is. You can't really make it out very well, but it is still there. So the kitchen wing is standing for at least a century. And very soon after this, 1853, we have good newspaper accounts showing that the then owner, a fellow called Joseph Wood, pulled down the kitchen wing and rebuilt a whole new wing on the site at kitchen wing. So now we're looking at a map of 1874 and a bird's eye view. And it's a little hard to see in the bird's eye view, but the east wing of the house, you can see that there's a much larger structure attached to the main block of the house there. And it's also reflected in the map in the bottom. So that's going to really complicate the archaeology, having a totally new structure built on the same site in the 1850s, on top of where the 1742 kitchen wing used to be. And my final picture here, just to sort of set Jim up here, is the final thing that happens, which most of you will have some familiarity with, is in 1929, the Stokes family, with the then owners of the Trent House, gifted the property to the city of Trenton on condition that it be maintained as a museum. And that's why we're here today. And in conjunction with that, as a WPA program in the mid-1930s, they restored the house. And part of the restoration of that house involved removing this east wing that had been built in the 1850s. So we're looking at pictures taken here in 1934. If you can just visualize the front of the Trent House, so looking from the south, in that upper left image, you can see that east wing with a greenhouse attached to the front. The next upper right image is looking on the opposite side, so from the north, and to the left, you're looking at that east wing. You've got an oblique view in the bottom left. And then if you look really closely at the bottom right image, you can see they've actually started demolition. And the part of the second story there, you can see there's a chute going down from the second story down to the front of the garden. That's the demolition work beginning. So this was all pulled down in mid-1930s. The grounds were restored. The well, we think, was rediscovered and restored. And that's pretty much what we see today is the original 1921 main block of the house still surviving, but everything else gone. So Jim, you get to do your thing, right?
All right, I think everyone here knows that the site has a great history, and Richard sort of documented or showed the documents that we have, the maps, the photos, the first-hand documents, the wills and deeds and such that demonstrate the history of the site. But there were still a lot of questions about the site, and as archaeologists, and this nice big open yard in the little peaceful section of Trenton, we became very interested in doing some archaeology at the Trent House. This is not everywhere we've dug on the site. This is actually not quite exhaustive, but this shows a lot of the shovel testing. You can see in the, can you actually see my, yeah, there you go. There's a lot of shovel tests up here, and these are small test pits dug with a shovel. We take the soil and screen it through a screen. A lot of that testing was done as part of school groups and part of an educational experience. We also did some archaeology around the house when they improved the drainage system. Right all around the Trent House, we excavated and they put in a new drain. There's also some trenches we did on the secret tunnel that runs from the carriage house to the Trent House. I'm just going to let that one lie there. So I wanted to show that, you know, there's a lot of archaeology done since the early aughts at the site. But if you can see, there's not a lot going on over right by the house. Those red units that you see next to the house, over here and down here, those are things we did more recently. And that started, first off, here's another reason. As part of the process, we take the historic maps and the archaeology we've done so far, and we did some analysis. The orange or yellow squares on there show where buildings stood on the site throughout its history. And you can see behind the carriage house here, there were a whole range of mills on the banks of the Delaware. In the sort of north central part of the property, there's a range of domestic buildings, you know, row homes. And then you can also see the 19th century wing, the 1850s wing or east wing, extending off the house that's no longer there. So we have to take that into account when we plan out our archaeology. Okay, so we're really starting to talk about the archaeology that began in 2014. And this was a program that the Trent House, Hunter Research, and the Archaeological Society of New Jersey did over the course of a few weekends in the summer. And these are volunteers who just showed up that day and helped us dig. And what we found was actually pretty tantalizing. Sure, we expected to find things out here, but we found several foundations, including let's see, this one here in particular. There's another one here, and this one connects to the well, the bricks in the top right, top left of the plan, and that really made us think, boy, there's some real archaeology out there. And we started to try to figure out how the archaeology we found related to the kitchen addition. So we took that 20 by 30 measurement and overlaid it onto the a site plan of the archaeology that we did, and this is what we came up with. In addition to that, after the 2015, we said, hey, it'd be a great idea to have someone come and do ground penetrating radar at the site. So we had a guy, Dr. Peter Leach, come, and he did a radar of this section of the site. So from the sort of western side of the Trent House over to the street. We knew that beyond this to the west, it's a little messed up with various buildings. And just to keep it constrained, and GPR guys like to go in neat straight rows back and forth. They don't like when there's lots of things in the way. We confined it to this area. And these are some of the things we found. The first one in the top in the left is at, let's see, that's 25 centimeters below the ground surface. And you can see the driveway at the top. You can see some walkways. You can see the brick walkway out front very clearly. You can sort of see some lines around the well, which is in the center here, there. And then on the next one, that's at 40 centimeters. So about, what is that? 1.3 feet below the ground surface. You're starting to see some of the fancier landscaping sidewalks, especially up in the northwest there. There's a circular patch right north of the house that looks like some kind of shaft feature potentially. There's a very dark square to the east of the house, but just below the well there, that looks like it's a building foundation. So as we got a little even deeper than that, this is at 2.3 or 70 centimeters. This is below the pathways. And what we're starting to see are some off the side of the Trent House, off the east side, we have some linear walls coming out that are coming straight out. We also have a sort of a rectangle that's north of the well shaft. And then there's this, one of these circular features up here in the backyard also, it persists at that depth. And so we thought this was pretty interesting. The other thing that shows up in this radar is this dark semi-rectangular, sub-rectangular smudge to the south of the house, right in front. And it's a pretty odd feature. It's long, rectangular with two sort of square blocks sticking off the back of it. And I have to admit, we thought, is that potentially Battlefield? Is that the house that predates it? If you remember on the map that Richard showed, it was at an angle like that. It faced southeast. So this is something that really piqued our interest and really made us want to push to do some archaeology. So in 2019, in connection with Monmouth University and Rich Veit, we opened several excavation units and reopened some excavation units from 2014. And we opened a block of units in the front of the house. There were these ones to the south to identify that what we'd call a radar anomaly. And then a bunch of units to the east of the house to further refine what we knew about those foundations that were out by the kitchen area. This is some people excavating, some Monmouth students at the time, looking for Battlefield, that 1780s-ish house that predated the Trent House, that really great radar signature. But what did we find? We didn't find a house. We found a giant square, rectangular outcrop of bedrock. And there was nowhere did we find masonry laid together in a wall or foundation. That being said, we found great historic archaeological materials. We found great Native American pre-contact materials, I think more so than the historic materials. And most importantly for this site, we figured out what was going on stratigraphically. So this is a little nerdy, but I'm going to start at the bottom of the profile here, at the bottom of that stick, which is a range pole. We use them in all our photos. That's 1 foot sections. At the very bottom of that, that is probably immediately post-glacial, 13,000 years ago. And that's what we call subsoil. It doesn't have a lot of material in it until you get much closer, about 2 feet up, and then you start to get the pre-contact material. And that's all what we call a subsoil. It's got a lot of the organics are out of it. And that was starting to yield pre-contact artifacts. And then sitting on top of that is this very dark brown stripe that goes right across the middle of the profile. This is the historic ground surface. So this is the ground surface when they came to build the house. So this was the organic material, the topsoil for the pre-Trent occupation of the site. This is really important to define. And this also yielded a lot of pre-contact material. It's cut into at this far end here by a historic feature that also yielded great sort of early 18th century historic material. But this really kind of explained to us a lot about the stratigraphy of the site. Above the dark band is a light sandy band that's also subsoil. It should be underneath it. What it is we think it's upcast subsoil from the excavation of the cellar hole for the Trent House. So they had to dig a gigantic hole to put the Trent House in. They took that soil and spread it all around the house after they excavated it, and it capped the buried A horizon, the buried historic ground surface, which is awesome. That's what archaeologists like to find. Above that, we have some other fills, historic fills, probably late 18th century fills. There's a little lens of really white colored stuff at the north end of that profile. That's from a pathway that used to come straight out of the house. And then there's some other fills on top of that are sort of more recent landscaping fills. So that really helps us figure out how deep we need to go to get to what period. And it's that the presence of that construction deposit, that upcast subsoil from the construction of the Trent House, also helps us date other things going on the site. Okay, because we had that really cool soil profile, we went and we did auger testing. So we took a little 4-inch bucket auger and dug 75 little test pits all around the property and had a soil scientist examine the soil all the way from where they could no longer dig into it all the way up. And he helped us date the soils, their development. And they also helped us identify areas of buried A horizons, historic ground surfaces, and areas where there's actually deeper deposits, or areas where there was fill to 4 feet and then a hard stop, which might be as a fill of some sort of building or something like that. So that was a very useful study we did. But this is one of the primary results of the 2019 field school. And these are the re-excavated units and then expanded units from the field school. And we felt at the time these represented the foundation of both the 19th century addition and the 18th century kitchen wing. Just going to point the one on your left with that flat stone and the real straight edge, we think is the edge of the 18th century kitchen. The big stone wall going up and down the center of that long trench, we felt was part of the 19th century addition. So that was great to find. And, you know, we had the measurements for the building. We had 20 by 30. So we could use that, if these walls are correct, to figure out where the kitchen wing was. One of the other things we found underneath the kitchen or this wing was the same soil sequence again. You can see the underlying subsoils, that dark band across the center, which is the buried A horizon. And then a little bit of sandy soil on top of that, which we think is related to the construction of the house. And then in this case, we had a lot of demo material on top of that. And that makes sense because we were within the footprint of a building that or one or two buildings that have been built and taken down. Couple of things here. That dark buried A horizon in this unit especially yielded artifacts we consider to be from the contact period. These are from the period where people are, or the Native Americans are here, and people are coming up and meeting them, trading with them. They are European objects being used by Native Americans. They're rare to find in New Jersey. They're rarer to find in situ, in place in New Jersey. So we think, you know, that dark surface is actually could yield more contact period artifacts as we dig more. Another little detail in the total right of that photo in the profile, you can see this line and there's black plastic coming out of that. That's because that's our unit from 2014, 2015. That black plastic was laid on the bottom of the unit we dug with volunteers. We never got anywhere near the buried A. We were in the demo fill for what was probably the 19th century edition when we were digging with the folks, the volunteer folks before. Not that that dig didn't help us and didn't get us going, but we really needed to get in there and dig a big hole to figure out this digging thing. Okay, and then from that 2019 excavation, we put this as our corner of the 19th century, 18th century kitchen. And again, this is another map that shows our excavations from 2019. And then actually these are the 2014, but it's the same kitchen, 19th century kitchen or 18th century kitchen edition in green. And then the 19th century wing is in the light blue. All right, so we convinced them to let us dig for another year. We skipped a year in 2020. I don't remember why. In 2021, we came back with abandon, and we found we spread units out across the property. This one is way in the back, towards that entrance over by the northeast corner. It's a brick surface, probably the floor of an outbuilding, probably a 19th century outbuilding, something like that. It's bricks reused to make a nice floor. This is a cesspit. This is you know, sometimes you're excited to find them, sometimes you're not. This one was in the backyard. It's the one we kept on seeing on the radar that persisted and was deep and showed up in the radar pretty deep. And it's got clay sewer pipes running to it. It had some 19th century artifacts. It was probably filled in the early 20th century. Maybe it's related to the demolition of the 19th century wing. We're not sure. And sometimes we're completely unlucky. And we did not put this trench in to find a PVC pipe. But right down the center of our unit, our little trench, we completely centered it on a PVC pipe. And that ruins the excavation, you know, for the whole thing. We're digging entirely within soils that have been dug up and redeposited in what, 1989, 1990? Okay, that doesn't mean we didn't find good things when we were digging beyond the kitchen. Okay. This is an excavation unit excavated closer to the far eastern border wall. And you can see in the foreground is a circular stone feature. It doesn't go much deeper than that, but it was filled with all those rocks you can see on top of the trench there. And it even has a little divot in the masonry here that looks like maybe it was for a pipe to go into it or something. We're not totally clear what that feature was for. And then on the other side of the trench, at the other end of the trench, is a foundation wall. You know, this could be some kind of, maybe it's a well, maybe it's a basin to store water. We know there was a wash house on the site. There are some outbuildings shown on some of the maps further to the east. This may be elements of that. Okay, but our primary goal in the 2021 investigations was to look back at for the kitchen, the 18th century kitchen edition, and try to get the corners of it and really figure it out. So this is the 7.5 foot square excavation unit we put in the, I was going to drop right down on the southwest corner of the kitchen, and it didn't, there was no wall there. There's a lot of stuff going on in this unit. And again, you can see this dark stripe right through it. That's our buried horizon. And although in this case, this hole that's excavated in the bottom of the picture, there was a pit dug in this unit that went to about 4 feet, actually 5 or 6 feet below the ground, that had a big milk pan in it that was broken in places. And that pit was full of historic material. It was some sort of refuse pit. So that we had to excavate that out before we could excavate the surrounding soils to make sure that the surrounding soils weren't contaminated by those historic artifacts. We weren't pulling historic artifacts out of what we thought was natural subsoil. There's also some evidence in this profile of what we call a robber trench, but they didn't line up with our projections for the 18th century kitchen. Over in this top right here, you can see some vertical lines along this mortar and brick deposit. That's where we think there was a foundation. Someone pulled out all the rocks, knocked all the mortar off, saved the good bricks, left all the mortar and bad bricks in the hole. And we call them robber trenches. They indicate the existence of a wall, but they don't, they're like what's left of the wall after it's been removed. Okay, so then we tried to go for the northern end of the 18th century kitchen, and we were successful. In the bottom right-hand corner, that wall is a really nice, substantial stone mortared wall. It had the right yellowy kind of mortar on it. And this unit in the top left, we expected this wall to come across right at the bottom of that unit. And it was a little bit off. It's about 5 feet off. You can see it at the top here. There's a wall coming across, and then a wall extending down straight out of it. And these walls were so substantial, they don't line up with the 19th century edition. Stratigraphically, they sit sort of in that buried A horizon, the historic ground surface. The artifacts associated with them were 19th century, or underneath this one wall in the bottom right, we had Native American artifacts. That we think this is indeed the wall for the 18th century kitchen. And in the top left, that wall that sticks straight out and runs north-south, that's probably a fireplace support or a hearth support that sticks out of the northern wall. And here's our old friend, the buried A horizon again. And you can see how the masonry of this wall just sort of sits right in it. It's almost a little bit on top of it, but there's no intervening layers, I don't believe. Okay, so here's the overarching view. This yellow outline is our kitchen from the 2019 excavations, but you can see from this, they don't line up. It's got to be moved north. What we're coming to figure out now is that some of the walls we were finding in the southern end of this excavation were related to the 19th century East Addition, and not to our kitchen. So we have shifted everything to the north, and we've moved the location of the kitchen. I think it's about 5 or 6 feet to the north to line up. And now that really perfectly lines up with the masonry here, the sidewall we have here. And it actually, it lines up with a change in the stratigraphy at this trench that we thought was related to the filling of the well, but maybe it's related to the demolition of that wall when the 19th century addition was put in. This has also reconfigured our idea of how the breeze or the gangway comes across. And we're still, I admit, struggling with exactly how this worked. It seems like this edge would be centered on the cellar entrance into what was the cellar kitchen. And then you would come in from the side here to get into this building. You'd go out the back door and come in from the side along the gangway. We're still trying to work that out. We're looking for historical examples of that. And that's something we'll explore in our upcoming report. So we did a lot of digging. I talked about stratigraphy. I didn't talk about a lot of the artifacts that we found. And Dr. Veit's gonna do that for us.
Let's go to some of the artifacts. we've found. And before I get into this, a couple more sort of general thoughts. This has been a really extraordinary opportunity for me and for our students at Monmouth University to work on a top-rate historic site, a really important, a truly significant site, and to partner with Hunter Research, which has an extraordinary reputation as one of the finest cultural resource management firms in the region. And that has not only led to their students having great experience, but in some cases has directly led to them having employment after graduation, which is a very important thing. So through those multiple years of excavation, we've recovered literally thousands of artifacts, and they represent many different time periods that you've heard about in the previous pieces of the presentation. So we have Native American artifacts, such as this beautiful quartz or quartzite teardrop point. Here's a selection of projectile points. We would often think of these as arrowheads, right? But many of them weren't actually arrowheads at all. They were dart points or spear points. The ones sort of bottom right probably are arrowheads. And this is sort of a chronological arrangement. So we have several thousand years, 4,000 or 5,000 years of Native American occupation on this site before the Europeans even arrived. And these artifacts can tell us a little bit about that. I think of not to make light of the Trent House, but I think of the Trent House as sort of like Forrest Gump. If anything interesting is happening in the Delaware Valley, it's happening at the Trent House. And it's sort of like how Forrest Gump intersects with all these interesting events. So one of the things that Richard spoke about was the fact that there are substantial numbers of enslaved people who are living here on this property. And often we think that because we're in New Jersey, it's a northern state and slavery did not exist here. And that's incorrect. And historians are doing a lot to correct that. So we had some very interesting little sherds of pottery that you see over to the right. And on the left, I have a picture from the Florida Museum of Natural History of a vessel that was found in Florida. And this is a type of ceramic we think called Colonoware. It was first identified by an archaeologist, Ivor Hume in Virginia, and middle of the 20th century. He thought it was made by Native Americans, but subsequently other archaeologists, most notably a fellow named Leland Ferguson and Teresa Singleton, argued no, that it could have been made by African Americans and might reflect West African and Caribbean traditions. The pieces we have here could really go either way. We're not sure if they are Native American or if they were made by African American potters. One of the things that's really exceptional about them is the really tiny little lines across them, which might reflect the use of metal tools to make those designs, which would put them after contact with Europeans. At the same time, so this is a complicated set of artifacts, Native American pottery designs, and this is from Greg's collection at the State Museum. These are Munsee vessels from the Upper Delaware, often have these very linear designs on them. But as you can see, the lines here are much broader, much thicker, probably made with different types of tools. So that's one for us to ponder. Are they Native American? Or are they African American? Or both? We don't know. We also have some tobacco pipe fragments. And tobacco pipes are really interesting because they're the most intimate of artifacts, right? I mean, you hold a tobacco pipe in your mouth. And this is a little fragment of one. And again, you can see a tiny bit of a design on it. This may be a type of tobacco pipe that archaeologists in Virginia and Maryland are starting to call Chesapeake pipes. And if it is, that's pretty extraordinary. So here is our fragment on the bottom left. And on the upper right is a fragment of a Chesapeake pipe. So these Chesapeake pipes are made by folks of European descent, African descent, and Native American descent. And they reflect sort of the coming together of an American culture, sort of a Creole culture, if you will, in the Chesapeake. And note how similar that line is to the line you see on the example to the right from the Chesapeake area. Native Americans also made similar pipes, especially using this running deer motif, which we see in Maryland and Virginia as well. So it could be something similar to that. And these are pretty tightly dated. These are from the 1600s, very early 1700s, and they're quite rare this far north. We had some trade beads. So beads are one of the items that would have been traded between Dutch, Swedish, and English traders on the Delaware and Native Americans. And often we think of, you may have even heard of how Manhattan was sold for X amount of beads. And that sort of puts Native Americans in, I would say, sort of a derogatory or a bad light. Robert Grumet, and I was happy to see his book, Historic Contact, on the bookshelf here, has argued differently in his dissertation about the Lenape titled "We Are Not Such Great Fools," in which the Lenape say, like, hey, we're trading for things that are valuable to us, and we're trading off things that we don't think are that valuable, like these smelly beaver pelts. So beads like this are very interesting, and they speak to this time period where different cultures are coming in contact here. They're probably made in Venice or the Netherlands. We don't have a tremendous number of beads from the Middle Atlantic or from this part of the Middle Atlantic, but on Iroquois sites in upstate New York, or Haudenosaunee sites, or further south on Susquehannock sites, beads like this would be from the sort of 1670s again. So that's right at the cusp of contact here. These are trade kettles. So one of the things that the Lenape really value are metals. Copper and brass to them are very valuable. Now, we haven't found any whole kettles like this. If we had, we'd be on the cover of National Geographic. But we have found fragments of kettles. And this also speaks to a coming together of culture. So you could use those kettles to cook in, to carry things in. But if you're living in an indigenous society that doesn't have a lot of access to metals, unless you're trading copper in from Michigan or northern New Jersey or Connecticut, when you get metal, it's really valuable. And if that kettle gets a hole in it, you're going to keep using that metal. You're going to break it up. You might make projectile points out of it. You might make bracelets out of it. You might make pendants out of it. And that's what it looks like we are seeing here. You also might make cones out of that copper or brass. And these cones could be used to ornament your clothing. So think about Native Americans coming up with a whole new aesthetic, a new way of dressing in this period, this early colonial period. These cones continue today. They're used by Native American dancers in powwows, such as this woman here. This is something that's called a jingle dress. So we have these very items right here on our site. Pretty extraordinary. But the most interesting artifact of all, I think, is a piece of worked conch shell. So we don't have conch or conch here in New Jersey. I'm staying in Ocean Grove this week, and I've been looking, and there are lots of seashells. But this is not indigenous to the region. It's brought up from the Caribbean. It's all over the place in the Bahamas, in Jamaica. So this also speaks to really interesting trade networks that folks in Trenton in the 17th century are connected to people in the Caribbean, and they're making these ornaments. This one, it's sort of abstract. Like, does it represent something? I am not sure. It's pierced, so it could have been worn. It may have been a symbol of some sort of particular distinction. It's broken a little bit there in the corner, but it's an extraordinary artifact. And there's a big debate among archaeologists, led by a fellow Dwayne Ezra, wrote a dissertation on these, as to who's making them. Again, are they being made by Native Americans? They seem to be made with metal tools. Are they being made by the Dutch to trade to Native Americans, sort of taking advantage of a particular aesthetic desire? We don't know, but this falls into a broader category of work shell, similar to the wampum beads that are very well known from the Northeast. And wampum is so interesting because it serves both a religious function. It could serve as a memory device when making treaties. This is a treaty belt relating to William Penn that is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And it also could have served as a currency. So these worked shell beads really speak to this early colonial period. This is a fun find too. So when this came out of the ground, I don't think we initially knew what we were looking at. We have a little bit of stoneware, a type of ceramic, and it has this odd design on it. And we're puzzling it and we're turning it upside down and over, looking at it, just trying to figure out, like, what is that design? And ultimately, what we realized is we had part of what's called a Bartman or Bellarmine bottle. And you see a whole one on the right from Colonial Williamsburg. So these bottles are made in what today would be the Rhineland in Germany and the Netherlands. And they are ubiquitous in early America. They're like I don't want to call them Tupperware. That sounds like it takes something away from them, but they're being used for everything from alcoholic beverages to mercury. Sometimes people will put some human urine in them and little pins and bury them under a doorstep as sort of a magical talisman. They're used all over the place. So we have part of a Bartman's beard, a very interesting artifact, and love to find more of it. When I was in graduate school some years ago, we used to call these Bellarmines, and that was after this individual, Jesuit Cardinal Bellarmino. There's a school in northern New Jersey named after him, and it was supposed to look like him. He's a little paunchy, he's got a bit of a beard. It turns out, though, they were making these vessels long before he came on the scene and started persecuting Protestants. It probably comes out of an earlier tradition of sort of the wild man or man of the forest, the green man tradition, and you see that reflected here in a silver coin from the 17th century, where that guy wearing sort of a grass skirt with a great beard is depicted. Bricks seem perhaps the most mundane of artifacts, but in New Jersey and New York and even in Delaware, we have traditions that a number of early houses were built with bricks brought over as ballast on ships from the Netherlands. And this is an interesting concept, but it's sort of counterintuitive because particularly if you're in big chunks of New Jersey and Long Island, there's clay everywhere. So why would you bring bricks from the Netherlands? But it does seem that on occasion, we do find Dutch bricks called clinkers or Drylingen bricks. They're a little bit smaller, they're yellow, so think follow the yellow brick road. There are a number of them over the windows in the Trent House, and we found some fragmentary ones. This practice of bringing bricks as ballast from the Netherlands seems to die out by the very early 1700s. So they're good time markers for us too. And here you can see, if you look over the windows, those Dutch bricks employed. We found a gunflint. So when Richard was presenting before, he was talking about how this is sort of a nerve center. The Trent House is a nerve center during the American Revolution. We found one kind of clunky, beat up gunflint that would have been used to fire a musket or a rifle during the colonial period. This is another fun one. Okay, so this the story I'm about to tell you may turn out to be apocryphal in the sense that I might be just making it up, but this was an extraordinary find. So we have a little scale. It's pretty small, 1 centimeter. It's a piece of metal. It's pierced, and if you look at the bottom of it, it has a sort of crude coat of arms, maybe with a unicorn and lion or two beasts of some sort. And there's a crown, and then above those two animals, you can see 3 initials, and we think those initials are LFK. So this immediately sent us down a rabbit hole looking for who's the LFK who was at the Trent House. And you've heard of Henry Knox, seen here on the left, noted bookseller, artillerist during the American Revolution. Well, Henry's honey is Lucy Flucker Knox, LFK. And Henry, we believe, spent some time visiting the Trent House. Mrs. Knox is a very interesting person in that she's from a family of really staunch loyalists, and she gives that all up to be Henry's beau. And they go on to have really a wonderful life together, and they spend a lot of time in New Jersey. Ultimately, they retire up to Thomaston, Maine after the war. But we wonder if this might be her seal used to seal the wax on letters. And maybe because of that sort of crude, sort of almost it's almost a royal coat of arms, right? It's not quite, but maybe in a peak of anger, she threw away this emblem of royalty as she took up her new patriot cause. We don't know, but someone could write a novel about it. Here's another sort of similar wax seal, similar to the one that we found, a little bit finer. This is the Marquis de Lafayette as a young man. He also would have been very familiar with this area in the Delaware Valley. Distinguished officer serving with the Continental Army. And one of the more extraordinary finds, I think it actually came out of one of the auger tests, so those 4-inch round holes that Jim was discussing, done by John Steitler and others, was a little piece of glass. It's sort of a faux gem, if you will. And it says, I don't know if you can read it clearly, but it says Lafayette on it. And so this too leads to wild speculation. Like, did the Marquis de Lafayette himself lose this? That would be wild. And it was set into something. It's an intaglio. This is the Marquis de Lafayette later in life. So we don't actually think this is from the Revolutionary War period, but in the 1820s, Lafayette does this sort of triumphal tour. It's like Bruce Springsteen going on tour today, right? Everybody wants to see him, and he hits all the important sites. So we think this might be like kind of a tchotchke produced for folks like you would get a concert T-shirt today, that you had seen Lafayette. In fact, he spends a lot of time just south of here in Bordentown with a friend of mine, Joseph Bonaparte, former King of Spain. He visits him twice, and he keeps this wonderful diary that just drives me insane, because when he's meeting with Bonaparte, he says, Joseph's estate, where I've done archaeology with Mama's students, is so well known that there's no reason to say anything about it. And I just want to strangle him, like, tell me something about it. More mundane, but equally interesting. This is an enormous, I mean, it's like that big, redware bowl with a black manganese glaze inside. This was at the bottom of the pit that Jim described, inside what we think is part of, could be part of the kitchen wing, certainly an early feature. Pans like this are used for milking and dairy processing, and that would have been a really important part of foodways in the colonial Delaware Valley. This is also, I think, extraordinary in that it reflects the skill of the folks at Hunter Research, I guess Alexis and others, because often we find artifacts, people say, oh, you got to piece all that together, and we almost never do. But in this case, here's a real three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. And this is probably from the late 1700s. And again, speaks to foodways here. This was from our first season working together, the trench out in front of the house, where we were looking for the earlier house, which we're still looking for. We still hope to find it. And we got this piece of turned ivory or bone, it might be bone. And we weren't entirely sure what it was, but research seems to indicate that it's probably the head of a cane, such as the one you see here. And canes would have been, a fashion accessory for the well-dressed gentleman in the 18th century. And they also serve a secondary purpose, and that they could be turned into weapons. And if you think things have been dysfunctional in Washington, D.C., and we have political challenges today, we've had political challenges in the past as well. And here you see some senators going at each other with canes. They're really weapons. So again, an extraordinary find. Here's a fun piece. That's Ryan Radice. And I love the smile on his face. He's like grinning ear to ear. There's nothing for a student like, being able to put your hand, or for an adult for that matter, being able to put your hands on the past. And in this case, he's found a domino. And so a lot of the stories we're telling are pretty serious, right? Stories about enslavement, about Native Americans, but this is a story about play, and how there were children here and adults who were probably engaged in playful activities. And here's a sort of somber looking young lady with her dominoes from about the same time period. So we've had 2 extraordinary seasons working together, and many more that Hunter has worked at the Trent House. And I hope from this presentation, you've seen just how rich and important a site it is. I would also say that it's a site that hasn't given up all its secrets yet. There's still so much more we could learn about it. As we better understand the kitchen, thanks to the fine mapping that Hunter Research is doing, that kitchen is really purpose built to hold people who will be cooking for the Trent family and for other, actually it's later families, it's not the Trents. Those people are often enslaved or servants. Being able to tell their stories through archaeology is really important because there aren't too many other ways to tell it effectively. We don't have all the documents we would like. Understanding that history of interaction between indigenous people and early settlers, that is also something that's not very well documented in the written records. And then the rich Revolutionary War and later history of this site, again, reflects New Jersey's history as a whole. So it's almost like from this one site, we can tell a much larger story, what we might call micro history. So with that as a conclusion, thank you so much for coming out today and hearing a little bit about our excavations, which we hope are ongoing. And if you have any questions, you have all three of us here to try and address them. Thank you.
I'm Joe Stramick. I teach British and British Imperial History at Southern Illinois University of Barbadale, and I'm just coming to Northeast because my family's from here. So I come back every summer and he invited me to this talk today. The comment that I have about the first presentation and the part where you have the what we think is an enslaved boy in the book is a very common. I'm sure you know this is very common portraiture of the 18th century to have that. You think, for example, Washington, the most famous example is George Washington during the Revolutionary War. And then later when he's president and Billy Lee is like off there lurking, right? And so Billy Lee was his famous servant and slave. British portraiture in the 18th century always had this, or it was a Moorish, almost like a Moorish, so I think you're dead on with that. And so I think that's very interesting. And you find that here in New Jersey. One thing that's always struck me as very interesting, I don't do American history, but it's unavoidable to bump into it, especially when I focus on British Imperial. So much of our history was imperial before we had our own national history. I've always thought it very interesting that the North, well, slavery can persist in New York State in the 1820s. I mean, they're just kind of a very protracted manumission process. New Jersey, I think, was the 1850s.
Yes.
Right up to the Civil War. So I think we really do need to tell this history, it's a more nuanced history. And so I applaud you for all the efforts that you're doing.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for someone else, we have quite a few. Tom Charles said, wonderful presentation. Thank you all. Martha said, great presentation, especially the material culture. As I am a curator, I do have a comment to share about the gangway, and that it was almost certainly used as a way to get the cooked food from the kitchen to the house without anyone seeing the enslaved people who were cooking and serving the food.
That's good.
Thank you, Martha. Is there someone else? Yeah.
Oh, Sam.
A question for Jim and repositioning of where the kitchen is.
Sure. It's like might, all the while we're out here digging, and this happens on every archaeological site. People keep coming and they ask, "What do you got here?" And if they come to me in the morning, I'll say one thing. By the afternoon, that's a different building. Doesn't have anything to do with the kitchen, and this thing has moved around a little bit. So,
one of my questions about that is, do you still believe the well was inside?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, we do. We do, and I think we're also looking for examples of that happening elsewhere. So if anybody has a good one, please let me know. I've seen them sort of immediately adjacent to kitchens where they're sort of built into the wall. I don't know. There's maybe one or two cases where there's one in the kitchen.
They talk about the 4 rooms upstairs, it's a very small room. And are we dealing with one big room downstairs, which has got the well? It's not centrally located within that room, which is interesting. it's also not in the corner. It's kind of,
So if they, if
Interesting.
there was a wall halfway across that,
Mm.
that building, the well would take up a lot of space in one of the
Yeah.
rooms. So
right.
I think that would make an argument that there wasn't a dividing wall on the first floor,
The other,
or else it might have been small.
the other thing is that, when you move that whole kitchen room up, it complements the wall that you might think is the hearth buttress.
Yeah,
So that the well is more towards the bottom of the building.
yeah,
Right,
away
right,
from
the
that
house
hearth.
is the other way.
But also it does create a doorway out to enter the back door
Yeah,
instead of going into the cellar, because where's the dining room?
yeah,
Or where's the area for food? You're not gonna have an enslaved person go down the basement and then up, are you? Or, you know
no.
what I mean?
That's
Easier.
that, we're looking at the drawings right now, and that, right now, there is a northeastern door there. And we're like, has that been there the whole time? It looks like it has, but there's some oddities in the way that first floor fireplace is situated far from the exterior wall. So it's something we're looking at as far as the,
So,
Sorry. Yeah, in the correspondence where Lewis Morris is asking for the kitchen to be built, he actually, I think it was in the text there. He also asks for the basement entry to be blocked up, but I don't think we actually believe that ever happened. It's so I think there was both access into the basement from the gangway and also first floor access outside and in through the back door. We're still struggling with how to make sense of that.
I mean, there is precedence for a later period. I mean, when you think about Monticello, you know, you do not want to see slaves. They're always in the basement.
Right.
Underneath.
Right.
yeah.
Of course, that speaks to TJ's perverted sense of things. So I'm not a fan of
Yeah.
that. I would follow myself personally. But you know, it's only 50, 70 years later, and
Right.
it's the same culture, you know, British
Yeah.
American culture. So that
Yeah,
makes sense.
right now, the rear door, the northeastern door comes into a small room with a fireplace. And then from that, you go right to the stairway. So there's like a antechamber there where servants could come in, or enslaved people could come in, set up what they needed to do, and then someone might take it from there
Right.
elsewhere in the house.
again, we don't think, we interpret it as there's no direct access from the kitchen downstairs into the stairs. of the house. That we have a door now where people can walk down to the kitchen. We didn't have it. We don't think that it was there.
Yeah.
But I have another question, and I'm sure you're.
And don't forget Zoom people.
Say it again.
Zoom people have some Zoom comments and questions as well.
Okay,
So, you know.
I'll hold.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't want to do that to you,
No,
Sam,
go ahead.
but. So I'll just go through this and then remember your questions. So I have Sally, who said this has been fascinating. It is so nice to have the overview of multiple digs and explorations with mapping, starts, and fits. It brings us all into your process. Tom said, really appreciate the respect shown in the presentations to Native American, African American peoples. Martha said, William Trent had extensive trade connections with the Caribbean, so having that decorated conch shell is not surprising to me. Nice to see the Bartman jug fragment as well as the pipe fragments too. And then I just want to get to this next question, and then we'll take a break from Zoom. Is there a plan or idea to recreate the kitchen? And then I'll come back to the Zoom, so keep filling it in, everybody.
Sam could speak.
That
to
last one may be for Sam.
Okay, we found the perimeter, we found the foundation so we can outline it on the ground so that people can see it. Because when I go out there and we're walking around, we say, here's where the kitchen was, you see a grassy area, it's hard to visualize, so how are we doing on it?
With Kingsbury, I think they're pretty close. Boy, one or two more trenches would really make a difference.
So KRD said the Trimble House at the Newland Grist Mill has a well and a kitchen addition.
Thank you.
Delaware County, PA Not sure which came first.
And we know that site, yeah,
know that
that's
site.
great.
Yeah.
Martha continues with, when I was working on the kitchen furnishing plan 15 years ago, the only analogous ones I could find were basement kitchens, and they were in Philadelphia. So it is not surprising that when William Trent built his house, that he'd have a basement kitchen as well, but it is really inconvenient.
You know, it's possible that it's very possible the well was there before the kitchen was built, because people would have been going in and out of the cellar there to go to the kitchen. So the well's right down the path from that cellar entrance. So they might have wanted to put the kitchen addition on and said, well, the well's in the way. Well, we'll just incorporate that into the kitchen addition.
And what's next? What, if you had your druthers, what would you do next?
I'd put a couple more trenches on it. Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, to refine the location of the gangway and the western wall of the kitchen. We don't have that. You know, we missed it with that big 7.5 foot unit, which is supposed to be, it was really supposed to come down right on the corner, and no corner ever appeared. I think we should have started getting suspicious right away when we started digging that one. But that northernmost unit with the support for the fireplace really, it really makes us feel like we have it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. This was awesome. I don't have anything else in the chat on Zoom. There's no one else. We just really want to say thank you.
Thanks very much.
Couldn't see how big the redware bowl is. Can you specify?
Oh, it's 2 feet, 1.5 feet, 3/4.
So, Jim, you're standing too far back in the Zoom window for people to see.
1 3/4. Maybe 2 feet in diameter. It's a really big bowl. And they would have put milk in them, and they're big and open at the top for cooling milk, right? And for the cream to accumulate the top.
So thanks, folks. And Jeff, thank you for your tech. All right.